Good morning, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Finding Help with Special Needs. My name is Lola Aneke. Today, we'll be talking about no, that's not fair. So, before we go on, I'd like to apologize to you all that you had to watch this on video because I will not be available by 4 o'clock, and I thought the best way to reach out to you without you missing out on Finding Help with Special Needs by 4 p.m. is by ensuring that I do a video. So please, I hope my apology is accepted, and I hope you find this topic really interesting and helpful at the end of the day, which is the aim of the whole idea of finding help with special needs. Last week we talked about help, it touched me, and all we're trying to say last week was that, or is that, disability or special needs is not contagious. So I hope we all understand that by touching an individual with any form of disability does not mean that you will be affected by the disability. So this week we're talking about no, that's not fair. I tried to look up the meaning of fairness in the dictionary, and I realized that most times we as adults and even the children, unfortunately, the children copy or just look at us as role model, and then they just use the same word or behave the same way we behave. So we just use the word that's not fair. We don't use it right most of the time. So we find out that the children around us also just use the word that's not fair. I remember when this the post for today's special needs, finding help with special needs, was put on social media. Someone said to me, "Oh, I like that topic because two of my children are always using that word. If I do something for one, the other one goes, that's not fair. And then if I do something for the other one, the other child goes, that's not fair." And I only smiled, and I hope she gets to watch this video so that she can understand what I'm talking about. So let's quickly look at the meaning of fairness. Fairness means impartial and just treatment or behavior without favoritism or discrimination. I'll take that again. Fairness means impartial and just treatment or behavior without favoritism or discrimination. Of course, we are on finding up with special needs. So everything we're talking about is about special needs. And what I really had in mind today was to explain the meaning of fairness when it comes to special needs, because there's no way we can talk about special needs and inclusion without talking about fairness. So it means impartial and just treatment or behavior without favoritism or discrimination. The two words there that really struck me is favoritism and then discrimination. So when we talk about inclusion, there's no way we can practice inclusion without talking about accommodation and modification. So if we're talking about special needs or children living with disability and how we can include them in our various schools, that means we have the IEP, which is the individualized education plan for these children. And the whole essence of that is so that we can understand who these children are, understand their strength, their level of functioning, the present level of performance, and the what we expect of them after a while. So basically the goals, all that we have in plan for them, who will be facilitating what, who will be working with them, and how we plan to modify. So you find the modification in the IEP of that child. And there's no way we are talking about IEP and modification or accommodation without talking about fairness. So I've had an issue where I go into a classroom to support a child, and the other kids are looking at me funny, and then at the end of the day they walk up to me, "Can you also stay with me doing my classes? Can you stay with me doing my lectures so that I can do better?" And I smile. And what came to mind for me was, there's no way we can practice inclusion without involving everybody. I've always said that inclusion is not about having a shadow in the classroom. Inclusion is not about bringing the child in and hoping that the child would be able to cope in the classroom inclusion is not about thinking that we are doing that child a favor. It's beyond that. So inclusion involves everyone being involved. It involves we creating awareness to all of our staff, either that's as school owners or in schools, to all of our staff and even the children. We need to create awareness. We need to help them understand what inclusion is all about. We need to help them understand what special is all about. We need to help them understand what disability is all about. And even as parents, we need to let our parents know, parents of other children in our schools, understand what inclusion is all about, what disability is, and what special needs is, what accommodation is, what IEP is, the features of IEPs, what modification and accommodation should look like. So it's not just about the child coming into the classroom with a shadow. No, it's all encompassing. Everyone needs to be on board and understand what special needs is and what disability is. So today I'll be talking to parents again, like I always do. I'm talking to teachers, to school owners. If we want to begin what we call inclusion in our schools, even in homes. So let me start with parents at home. For that parent that said, "Oh, my child says to the other child, to me, that's the way I'm treating the other child is not fair to her," and that's why we looked at what fairness is before we started. I would like to look at that again, the definition again. So fairness means impartial and just treatment of behavior without favoritism or discrimination. If you flip it over to the other side, because most time we find out that the children with special needs or the children with disability are the ones that other neurotypical children or children without disability say that word to. So you hear a child without disability say, "Oh, it's not fair the way you are providing extra help for this child with disability. I need that kind of help also." I remember when I was doing my training in the US, that one of the teachers, or one of our special needs teachers, was saying to me, our parents walk up to her and say, "You know what? If this is all that children with special needs are getting, the kind of support they're getting, I want my child to be labeled as a child with special needs also, because of the kind of accommodation that we give to these children with special needs." Forgetting that an assessment has to be done, a team of professionals have to be present at the child's assessment for us to categorize that child as a child living with special needs, and before that child can qualify as a child who will be getting special needs support and who will be needing an individualized education plan in order to succeed in the classroom. So they forget that there's need for assessment before a child is being categorized as a child with special needs. So they feel that the child is being favored more than their own child, and that's always not the case. So let's bring it back home. I would like to address that parent that was saying to me that their child said to them that they are not being fair to them because they tend to treat the child with special needs better than they treat them that are not living with special needs. So basically what it is, what you need to do. So what you're doing without knowing is you are providing a form of accommodation or modification for that child. So if, for example, your child is a kind of child that is sensitive to taste. So some children with autism, they are sensitive to certain food. If you do not blend the food, the child might not be able to eat it. Some children with special needs do not eat some kind of food, so they do casein and gluten free diet. And then the other child who is not living with special needs feels that, "Oh, that's not fair. Why would you give this child this blended food? Why can't I have mine also blended?" And it just boils down to the beginning. Let's start from the very beginning. There's no way you expect that child without disability to understand that the sibling is living with disability and therefore require a form of accommodation or modification in their diet. So the first thing you need to do is you need to help them understand their strengths and differences. So you sit them down, however you want to do it, depending on the age of the child, depending on the level of understanding. It's good for you to help them see the reason why their sibling is eating either a purified food or eating a different kind of food from them, and which is okay. If you help them understand the reason behind what you're doing, most times you realize that these children at least say that it's not fair. that you are treating that child better, so to say. They feel that it's better, but the truth is that that is what that child needs. Remember, the definition of fairness is that we have to let me take it again. It says impartial. We have to be impartial, and we have to be just in treatment or behavior, without favoritism or discrimination. So we're not trying to discriminate, or we're not trying to make sure somebody has is more favored than the other. It is what that child need at that time that we're trying to provide. So if my child who is not living with autism, or does not have sensory issue, um, does not need to eat period food, or does not need to eat another kind of food, that's also fairness, because I'm not forcing that child to eat period food because the siblings eating period food. But what happens is that if you're able to explain to that child from the beginning, look, this is what's going to happen when we're eating pasta. I would need to give your sister a softer version of what you're eating, or a pasty version, because if he eats the same kind of pasta that you're eating, this is what's going to happen. She's going to feel uncomfortable. She's going to feel, but sometimes those words are even beyond them. It's just, you're just speaking above their head. It's better for you to help them experience it in a particular way. So for example, I could decide to have let me use the touch, for example. Let me use the touch for example. So I could start to have a very soft mouth form, and have another that quas, or very tough sponge. There are different kind of sponge. The soft foam is a softer, is a smoother one that the skin tends to accommodate more for younger children. And then the coarse one, the other type, is a type that is a bit harsh on the skin. I could have two of my children together, the one without disability and the one with disability, seated on the on the couch with me, trying to explain why the other child would need a softer texture. And the truth is that once I do that, and the other child without special needs feels it, is able to tell me the difference. If I is able to identify the difference, the texture of the sponge, I could also ask the child, so which do you prefer? So I give them choices, so that in future it doesn't feel that I'm being impartial, or I'm not being fair to her or him. By the time they understand that, understand the reasons for this, our actions, it's easier for them to accommodate their siblings, or also understand the issue of modification. So that's in the home front. For parents of children living with disabilities, always make them understand what's going on prior to when the situation occurs. Give them reasons, show them practical examples, so that they can understand that the reason why their other sibling is being treated in a particular way, different from the way they are treated, so that they don't feel that you are not being just, or you're being impartial, or you're showing favoritism, or you are discriminating against them. That way, it's easier for them to also advocate or fight for their siblings when other people want to take advantage of them. So it's always important. I remember a parent was asking me this question a while ago: how do I explain to my child's siblings that their brother or their sister is living with a particular disability or the other? Make it simple, make it plain. Think of ideas and ways and practical ways they can understand what's going on. Always explain to them, and then to their own side, to let them see that their difference is also being celebrated also. So that way you are finding that it's easy for them to just flow in the line of what is going on. Now let's bring this back to the classroom. In our classroom, there's no way we practice inclusive education, or modification, or accommodation, or the proper execution of our individualized education plan, without teaching the other neurotypical children, or children without disabilities, what accommodation look like, what disabilities look like. So when we're talking about modification and accommodation sometimes are used interchangeably, which is okay, because when you're practicing accommodation, there are four different ways by which you can practice it. The first way is in the presentation, how you present your lesson to the children, how you help them understand what you're teaching. And let's not forget that we have different kind of learners. So in as much as we have children with disability in our classroom, we need to understand that children learn in different ways. Like I said the other day, Children could be, some of the children could be kinesthetic learners, some of them can be auditory learners, some of them can be visual learners, and some of them can be um we have the tactile learners also. So the fourth one is tactile learner. We have kinesthetic learner, auditory learner, and the visual learner. So in your presentation, you need to understand that a child who likes to move around, you need to learn to present your lessons to them in that way, because that's the only way they'll be able to understand what you're talking about. That's the only way to resonate with them. You need to find out what kind of student you have in your classroom and then present your lesson to them in that kind of way. Also, their presentation matters too. So for that kinesthetic learner, for that tactile learner, for that auditory learner, for that visual learner, their presentation has to be in a way that is more comfortable for them, and it is more easy for them to explain what they've learned to you. And this also works for children with disability, depending on the kind of disability. If the child is living with visual impairment, if the child is living with auditory impairment, if the child is living with speech impairment, if the child is living with orthopedic impairment. So most of these things go hand in hand. It's just for you to understand what the child is going through and be sensitive to it. An effective teacher must be sensitive to their teachers. It goes beyond just going into the classroom to make presentation to teach. You have to also understand that these children have to show you how they understand what you are teaching in their form or the mode in which they make the presentation back to you, their response back to you. We also have to consider um, our our setting. So how do you arrange your classroom for these children to be able to be successful in your classroom? For a child who has orthopedic impairment and needs to move around with a wheelchair, how is your classroom setting? For a child who is living with ADHD, that's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, how do you ensure that the child is not easily distracted, if it's the issue of distraction that the child is having, or the child is not is not aloof, or is not so we have ADD, which is attention deficit disorder. The child just blanks out. How do you ensure your classroom setting, or the setting, because the setting doesn't have to be necessarily be just your classroom. You can decide to have a lesson outside. You could decide to have the lesson by the sports arena, or by the lawn tennis court, or by the gym. You can decide to have your your lesson in different parts of your school. It could even be it could be home, at the home. You might have to even go to the hospital if the child is being need hospital attention and is also probably being admitted in the hospital. So your setting matters. All that we're trying to ensure that the child gets what they need and they're not deprived of educational benefits. So that's what the setting should look like. Then in the area of timing, accommodation and modification also is important for us to consider timing. So if the child needs extended time, we need to, so if other children need 10 minutes, the child might need 20 minutes. The child might need that 10 minutes to be broken into 3 different times. So the child will work for 3 minutes and then he gets a break, and then he goes for another 3 minutes, gets a break, and another 3 minutes. So we need to understand something, that they need extended time, they need extra days to express themselves, or to get in the knowledge you're passing to them, and for them to also be able to respond back to what you're teaching. So if you look at this holistically, sometimes some other neurotypical children or children without disability feel that you're not being fair to them, forgetting that fairness is about ensuring that children get what they need at different times without discrimination or favoritism. And the way to avoid favoritism is to ensure that there is an assessment that categorizes these children to be needing the kind of support that they need. So if you understand most of this, then the word "that's not fair" will not be used commonly in the classroom and will not be used in the wrong way. So the best way to do that is by ensuring that everyone understands what special needs is. Our language matters. The way you make the children understand what disability is also matters. So I was thinking, okay, for a classroom teacher who has a child who is living with probably cerebral palsy, or a child who is living with orthopedic impairment or physical impairment, that we're needing a wheelchair, or we're needing that the classroom is arranged in a certain, or the student will be needing a ramp. We could decide to have a lesson about that, and probably have a child living without disability, and and the child with disability in the same setting, and having the child with that disability, probably we could arrange our classroom in such a way that we could have, maybe for me, this is what I would do. So maybe I have a child who probably limps, or who has issue with sensory with probably their hands, and then I could have like maybe put a flat surface on their hand and tie it something like this. I could do something like this, a flat surface, and then have my hand bandage around it, and I could have the child's hand bandage around it, and have the child write. For example, I could say, okay, so pick up your pen and write. There's no way a child with this kind of object in their hands, probably a phone or a flat surface in their hands, will be able to pick up a pen and write. That way, if that child understands that there's no way I can pick up a pen and write, then whenever I ask that the other child is allowed to use a laptop in my classroom to type, or is allowed not to write, and someone else writes for that child, the child will not feel that I'm not being fair, because it's not in the world of that child living with disability. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. If we actually explain to the children what is going on, have a practical section, a practical session with them, so that they can feel what children with disability are feeling, then it will be easier for them to understand and appreciate and accept children with disability easily, without being feeling that, oh, they're not being fair to them, or they're being partial to them, or they're being discriminated against. Why would you have him type? Why would you have somebody write for that child? Why can't they write for me too? If you can write, then there's no way you can use it won't be right for you to say they're not being fair to you. Another good example is probably for children with visual impairments, because if you're going to practice inclusion, it means that we're going to have children with visual impairments in our classroom. So I could have a lesson where I help them understand what individual with visual impairments are going through. I could have my children all in a classroom, those that can see clearly and those that cannot see, and then I'm trying to explain it. I could have a blindfold for the child without the child without disability who has no visual issue, and then I could make sure my classroom is well arranged and there's no way the child's going to fall. Even if they're going to fall, I could have like a surface where they won't injure themselves, and I could have pillows as obstacles, blindfold that child and have that child walk around, and then the child can tell me their experience afterwards, and then I'm going to have to explain to them that that's exactly what's what goes on with children with visual impairment. Also, for children with hearing or hearing impairment, we could also have something like probably have a earpiece that just blocks sound, and have that a child without disability put it on, and then I could speak probably normally or on a lower threshold, and as the child would have said, of course the child might not hear me, and then I'm going to say, look, imagine what a child A is going through. So whenever I ask that the child use hearing aid, it's not that I'm trying to be partial or trying to favor that child beyond you. If you put yourself in that situation like you went right now and you could not hear me, that's exactly what's going on with that child. That way, most of the children find it easy to understand what disability is, and then whenever we begin to put some form of accommodation in place in our classroom, they don't feel that they are being treated without they don't feel that they are being treated, that they don't feel that the neurotypical children or children of disability without disability do not feel that they are not being fair to them. They don't feel that they are being partial to them. They now understand what's going on with children with disability, and they're able to cope with the accommodation you are giving to children with disability and not feel somehow about it. They feel that it's easy for them to feel that this is the way it ought to be. That is actually fairness to them in the real sense of being fair to children without disability. So it goes beyond we saying that we are practicing inclusion or bringing a shadow in there or a scribe into our classroom as a form of accommodation for children with special needs. It also matters for us to ensure that children without disability or special needs understand what's going on using the kind of examples. So for, as a classroom teacher, you need to think of ways you can help other children without disability understand what's going on with children with disability, so that they can understand what accommodation and modification is obtainable in your classroom, and they do not feel anyhow about it. So that's a good way. Another way is giving them choices. So after that kind of exercise, that the child is being blindfolded and walks and stumbles against the pillow or something, a soft material, or when they block, when you block their ears with a hearing with a specialized earpiece, and they are able to experience the fact that some children do not hear that they hear, then they're on the same playing field, they're on the same level of field, and they can now understand that accommodation is actually not being partial to other children, and not being unfair to them. You could now give them choices. So you could say, what those I would want. So I remember that I saw something on Facebook about greeting the other day. So the teacher would say, would you want an high five? Do you want a hug? Do you want to dance? You want us to do like a fist bump? That's a form of accommodation. So you have to give choices. How do you want me to present my lesson to you? How do you want to present respond to me based on what you know? What kind of setting works for you? What kind of timing works for you? So you give these children choices. If you give them choices, and it's also part of inclusion, even the children without disability could decide that, okay, today, because I want to dance out what I know, I want to spell out what I know, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to write it, then your lesson becomes fun, your classroom becomes an inclusive classroom. So presentation also matters. For our school and other classrooms, it won't be a bad idea for us to have everybody in on our field or in our halls trying to explain what accommodation and modification is, the way we go about it. Extended time could be what reading out. So some form of modification or accommodation could be. I would like to also explain the difference between accommodation and modification. So accommodation means that the way we present what we so the way you present presentation is, so the what and the how we present our lessons, how we present how the children present back what they know to us, the setting, and the timing is how. That's the difference between accommodation and modification, the how. So you do not change the curriculum when you are talking about accommodation. It's just the presentation, the the presentation, the response, the setting, and the timing. So the how is what is being affected. Now, when we talk about modification, is the what that is being affected. Of course, the presentation, the response, the setting, and the timing matters for modification also. But the what, which is the curriculum, has to be changed in order to fit and to meet the need of the child with disability. So accommodation is the how, modification is the what. However, the presentation, the response, the setting, and the timing also would be affected. So a child who is living with hearing impairment will require hearing aid when it comes to accommodation. However, you do not need to modify the curriculum for this child. So in area of modification, you do not need to water down the curriculum, or you do not need to present a less challenging task to this individual. All that person need, with all the person that is living with hearing impairment need, would be an accommodation. So you might have to probably speak slowly, you might have to present the child with hearing aid, you might have to also give the person that with hearing impairment in your classroom extra time, because sometimes auditive processing can be take a little bit of time. So understanding disability will help us understand the difference between modification and accommodation, the way to present our lessons or curriculum to these children, the way they respond back to us. So sometimes the way a person with hearing impairment would respond back to us is not the same way the person with speech impairment or a person with communication disorder. They might need to do a sign language, they might need to sign what they're trying to say to us. And that's some of the examples of accommodation and modification. What is important that we know the difference between these two. So in rounding up for today's finding help with special needs, when we're using the word "that's not fair," we need to understand what fairness is, which are defined in the at the beginning. It's about providing without being partial, providing what that individual needs so that they can succeed in your classroom, considering the disability without discrimination, without being partial. Those are the words that should be ringing in our mind when we're talking about fairness in the area of special needs and disability. So whatever a child needs, if a child needs a shadow, let the child have the shadow or a support staff, like we use the word here in this part of the world. But we need to understand what's going on with that child. We need to understand the level of presentation. We need to understand the level of timing, the setting that we'll need for that child. The child needs, so for example, a child with albinism would have to sit close to the board as opposed to sitting far if the child does not have the glasses to help him see clearly, if the child needs to see from a particular distance. So we need to be careful to use, and when we use the word being fair, when we talk about special needs, most importantly with other children in our classroom. So like I said, help them understand what disability is by helping them go through what it is in the practical sense. Let them see the practicality of it, and then give them choices. Give these children choices. Give children with disability choices. Let them choose how they want to make their presentation to us. Let's consider setting and timing. Thank you for tuning in again today to yet another episode of Finding Help with Special Needs. My name is Lola Aneke. If you have any questions, because this is a video on Finding Help with Special Needs, if you have any questions, please leave it in the comment section and I will get back to you regarding the questions you have, and I'll respond to you. I look forward to having you again next week on yet another episode of Finding Help with Special Needs. Don't forget, today's episode is no, that's not fair. So let's keep thinking and looking at what fairness is in our classrooms, in our homes, so that we can make the world a better place for individuals living with disability. Thank you and have a blessed day.